Welcome everyone to this EVPA webinar, IMM Heated Discussion, taking on impact measurement and management burning topics, during which we will have the pleasure to touch upon a series of points that are really very relevant nowadays when we talk about how to measure, but most importantly, manage impact. My name is Gianluca Gaggiotti, and I'm here today with my colleague Alessia Gianoncelli, who is connected from Turin, and Arnau Picon Martinez, who is here with me in our office in Brussels. Together, we will guide you through an insightful debate on impact measurement and management, which has always been at the core of EVPA activities and those of its community and members. In 2013, we launched our first guide on impact measurement and management, which was updated in 2015, and that contains a 5-step process that has been adopted as an impact measurement and management standard by the expert group of the European Commission on Social Entrepreneurship. We have run a very successful course on impact measurement and management together with Social Value International for more than 5 years. And this year, we also experimented a new bootcamp format with more concrete tasks and assignments for participants, which has also proven to be very successful. Last but not least, last year, we also conducted an in-depth research interviewing more than 50 experts and practitioners from the ecosystem, which my colleague Arnau will elaborate on in a second. But let's have a look at the agenda of today's webinar. So the word webinar is not really the right word because we want to turn this into an engaging discussion with you. So after a very short introduction of my colleague Arnau of the Burning Topics series, we will discuss 3 statements that were formulated by the EVPA team starting from the Burning Topics series of articles. And we will discuss them with 4 experienced practitioners that we're very happy to have here today. And per each statement, after hearing the insights from the speakers, we will have a poll first to engage with you, and then an open discussion. So keep your phone close to you and do not hesitate to post questions in the chat. But please don't forget to clearly mention to whom you would like to address your questions. At the end, Alessia will wrap up and share our main messages and close the webinar. Lastly, please note that this session is being recorded and you should be able to watch the recording and consult this presentation as of next week on EVPA's website. It's with great pleasure that I'm introducing you to the 4 speakers we have here today. So I would like to ask them to show themselves and briefly introduce him or herself by answering also a quick question, but it's a fundamental one. Why do you think it is important that we raise the bar of impact measurement and management practices nowadays? So I'd like you to follow the order of the slides. So we'll start from Ben and then moving on with Katinka, Paige, and Peter.
Thank you, Gianluca. Thank you for the introduction and the opportunity to be part of the heated discussion today. So hi, my name's Ben Carpenter. I'm Chief Exec of Social Value International. For those of you that don't know, we're a membership body for social value practitioners all over the world, and we share the same vision and mission, which is to change the way the world accounts for value. So to answer your question, why is it important that we raise the bar on impact measurement management? Well, I think 3 reasons. First of all, the social environmental issues we face today are as big as ever and perhaps getting bigger by the day. So that's the first one. Secondly, I just don't think enough decisions at the moment are being led by impact data or being focused on how we can make as much impact as we can. And thirdly, I'm very concerned with the rise of impact washing. It poses a big risk. So it's time we all stepped up our game.
Thank you, Ben. Katinka. Katinka, can you hear who you are? Can you introduce yourself, Katinka, as well?
Do you hear me? Sorry,
Yes,
I
now we
was
hear you.
able to unmute myself. I don't know why. Hi, Katinka Gidevelainer. I'm the head of Third Social Entrepreneurs. Been there since we established 13 years ago, and we are investing in social entrepreneurs primarily in Norway. And we are an investor using a broad range of tools, from grants to equity and social impact bonds lately, and all the different tools in the box to get social entrepreneurs to do what they're best at. And I think raising the bar to me as an investor is, of course, really, really important, because we would like to invest in the best ones. We would like to invest in those persons and activities that are really creating an impact. And to do that, I need to compare. So I need to get a better and better tool in how I can compare one company to the other, one activity to the other. And how do you do that without having some form of quite good measurements, actually, and also getting those you invest in to steer their activities towards doing the best thing.
Thank you, Katinka. Let's now hear from Paige.
Great. Hi. Thank you very much for having me, Gianluca and EVPA. I'm Paige Nickel. I'm a director at Bluemark, which is a leading provider of impact verification services. We were launched by Tideline in 2020 and have now looked kind of under the hood at the impact management and measurement practices of quite a few different impact investors. So raising the bar in IMM is quite literally what Bluemark is all about. We think that rigor, discipline, and critically accountability are key to helping the impact investing sector continue to scale and have capital in to address the real challenges that we're all facing, and to have it all happen with integrity.
Thank you, Paige. And last but not least, let's hear from Peter.
Hi, my name is Peter Leeds. I'm economist. I'm an economist. I'm working for the Swiss Agency for Development Cooperation. It's a Swiss bilateral donor. Why raising the bar in impact measurement and management? Imagine a company that is growing fast, doing really good, but the accountant is ill and they're all very busy. So this year there's no financial accounting, and of course no audit, because they needed the money for growth. This is driving blind, right? Without impact measurement and management, it's the same. You are driving blind, or at least without the dashboard. You can't do without your financial accounting. You shouldn't do without your social accounting.
Thank you very much, Peter. I'll now leave the floor to my colleague Arnaud, who will briefly present you the Burning Topic series, and then we'll dive into the discussion.
Thank you very much, Gianluca, and thank you very much all the panelists for this introduction. So today we, as Gianluca said, this is not really a webinar, so we will not have so many slides or long presentations, but it's rather a discussion. But let me take just 3 minutes to provide with some context on what we are talking about. So following from the materials and the inputs collected during our work in navigating impact measurement and management, so last year we published a report, a series of case studies, a mapping of IMM frameworks. So from all this, we realized that it was really relevant to engage in high-level conversations and position investing for impact on topics that really shape the debate on IMM. So our aim with this is to leverage the knowledge and expertise of our sector, and also to influence relevant stakeholders in the impact ecosystem and beyond, I would say. So that's why we are the Burning Topics series that we are just published, and I'm going to talk about this in a second. They have an introduction that shows the EVPA positioning, but they are also complemented with contributions from leading experts and practitioners from the impact ecosystem. So let's see very quickly what are these burning topics about. We published already 3 burning topics, which are, as you can see here, ensuring accountability through stakeholder engagement, assessing contribution and attribution, and dealing with subjectivity when measuring and managing impact. And these are the topics in which we think that our community of investors are examples and can really be leveraged to raise the bar on IMM practice. After this summer, we will launch 2 more topics, which are related to fostering transparency and assuring impact, where our investors should really have influence to shape the debate, giving their expertise. And finally, later in the year, we will talk about more topics such as embedding SDGs in IMM, monetizing impact, and using standardized and customized indicators, which are more general for the whole ecosystem, let's say. So it's important to acknowledge that we will open this by the end of the year for contribution. So we want you, we want this to be an open debate, right? So we want you to, you know, if you have something that you feel you would like to contribute, or you have something to say in any of these topics, or you would like to suggest another topic, or there is something that resonates with you or with your organization related to this, please let us know. You know where to find us. Please drop us a text, even if in the follow-up email, and we will take it into account. Also, the first 3 topics are on the website, but also on LinkedIn. So feel free to go there and also leave your comments and share a little bit the debate with other practitioners. You will receive all these links in the follow-up email after the webinar. So yeah, that's only to encourage you a little bit to participate on this and to be part of it. Just to say very briefly that we will keep all this knowledge or all this discussion stored in the webpage in the new EBPA website. So yes, there is a new EBPA website that we are just launching now. It's still in beta version, as you can see, but you can already check it out and navigate the burning topics. So we encourage you to do so as well. So now, without further ado, let's go through the first through the debate and based on different statements that we thought were relevant to clarify. They are all based on these burning topics, but as Gianluca mentioned, there will be one Q&A session per each statement. So already feel free to write down your questions and start engaging in the debate from the beginning. So the first statement, it relates to the topic of accountability. And we state that as the financial sector is built to drive accountability to shareholders, the impact ecosystem should enhance accountability to intended beneficiaries. What do we mean by accountability? For us, accountability to beneficiaries, we mean not only collecting feedback from them, but also guaranteeing that their feedback informs and influences decision making. And we think that if investors really dedicate more effort in sharing information with their funders, then really understanding the needs and the expectations of their other relevant stakeholders, of course, including the intended beneficiaries, they will really tend to overlook accountability to stakeholders. So we thought that this was a burning topic, or that this will trigger a heated discussion, as we mentioned. So let's start with it, and I would like to ask Peter to start with this discussion. So Peter, starting from this analogy with the financial sector, what does the impact ecosystem need to do differently?
Well, first of all, I would say that the financial sector should be not only accountable to shareholders, but to many more, to stakeholders as well, and not only on financials, but as well on impact. And I think this is not a dream. It has already started with ESG reporting. And sometime in the near future, I would say we would see this with real impact measurement and management. And the impact ecosystem, we need to demonstrate why IMM is needed and why it is a good tool. Katinka said this very good in her introduction. We need this kind of tools to manage. So you need to manage your impact if you are an impact-driven company or organization. Otherwise, you are driving blind, as I said in the beginning, and you may crash into somebody or something. So managing your impact is very much aligned very often with your commercial interest. Think of unhappy clients. Are they going to recommend you? That's very important that clients are happy, not only because you want to improve their livelihoods, but it's for commercial reasons as well. They recommend you, okay? So if you don't have this as a company who wants to create impact, then it's time to introduce it now. Good practice is to have a theory of change, working with result chains, use technologies like lean data to really find out whether your goods and services are improving the livelihood of your customers, suppliers, employees, whoever you are serving, and whatever you define as impact. And this goes, of course, for all the those that are above you and invest in you, or support you, or provide grants to you. We all should to know where to put the money. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. That was a great way to start with this analogy. So now I'd like to give the floor to Ben. So Ben, talking about impact reports as well, what does an impact report need to have in order to demonstrate stakeholder accountability?
Thanks, Arno. Just to play a little bit more on the analogy with finance, in the financial sector, we have assurance providers and auditors that act on behalf of the people receiving financial returns. So the accountability exists to shareholders. If the financial returns are low, shareholders can go elsewhere, and that accountability is strong for an organization being held account for the financial returns. But in the impact economy, it's a different situation, because who gets the social impact returns? It's not the shareholders, it's not even the investors. The investors don't experience the social impact. It's the beneficiaries. But if the impact that the beneficiaries experience is low or even negative, is there an accountability? Like with the shareholders, the beneficiaries don't have a choice in many situations to go elsewhere. So there is that gap in accountability, and with impact reporting, there's an opportunity to try and solve that accountability gap. And as we're being controversial and having a heated discussion, I would go as far to say that impact assurance should be acting on behalf of the people who experience the impact. And it's not that the beneficiaries are going to read the impact reports, because often that isn't really going to happen, but we should pretend that they are. If we're accountable to those people and the impact that we say we're having, we should pretend like the beneficiaries are going to read the report and choose, was that enough impact? Can I go elsewhere for my impact? So that's the kind of, if we're trying to build that accountability that we need to think about. And just briefly then to kind of address what I think should be in an impact report. I don't want to list the report assurance requirements that SVI has, but we do go heavy on requiring a description in the reports on how stakeholders, and that means the people experiencing impact, have been involved in the measurement. Have they been involved in the conversations about what impacts they've experienced, what impacts should be measured, and that's really key to include in the report as like narrative of how the impact has been derived. I suppose the last thing that we think should be in reports is about how you're responding. And Arno, I think you just mentioned that as well. Like, what are the actions taken? So impact reports should be telling the story about how they've responded to the measurement and how they've made decisions with that data to improve the impact they're having for the beneficiaries.
Thank you so much, Ben. That was super clear. I think to further feed the debate, it will be great to have the point of view of a capital provider. So I think I would like you to jump in and tell us a little bit more. How can investors play a role in ensuring stakeholder accountability?
I like very much the way Ben put it, because I can recognize that from an investor perspective, that when we get in touch with a social entrepreneur that comes to us and present us with their brilliant new idea on how to solve social issues, we surprisingly often find that a lot of them are not able really to present really specifically how this changes the lives of the ones they're helping. And to me, that is kind of a first warning. Do they actually know their target groups? Do they actually know who the beneficiaries are? Or are they kind of shooting in all different directions with different kind of beneficiaries? So as an investor, I think to recognize that you need to be clear on who are the beneficiaries, and you need, as an investor as well, to be really concerned about them, and not about your own, your own system of measurement, which I sometimes see, or at least tend to see, that if you are really, as an investor or a foundation, having really set up schemes on how to present your own impact as an investor, you have a tendency maybe to be more into that than actually being into the beneficiaries and what kind of social results is actually happening out there. So and with our social entrepreneurs, we've been far into these discussions. But the first thing we do when we meet a social entrepreneur that we like is to do the due diligence on the social impact. And of course, if that is interesting and we see there's a large potential, both what they manage today, but also the potential for the next years, then we have to discuss with them how they actually manage to measure and how they can develop their company to maximize even more this social impact. And very often that is not in place in a really, because we are doing very much startups. So, and it is quite challenging to work with beneficiaries and to get what you may think have, I mean, you can go into a room and you can just notice that there are social things happening here, but you need to go in, have it in the systems. You need to do measurements. You need to be accountable, like what Peter was talking about. So how can you help these companies do it systematically and good enough, not to drown them? And should others come in and measure what you do and what you manage, or should the company themselves measure and judge what they actually are doing? And that's some of the first discussions we've been into, and we've decided that we want the companies themselves to be in the driving seat on doing the measurements and judging what they manage, because we need them to learn that this is important to them, to have this competence, to have this knowledge about what they do, how it affects people, and to bring them from how much they do as output kind of measurement and more into the line of what kind of changes are you actually creating within the people that you work with, and that's quite challenging. When it comes, for instance, to the Unikis case, one of our companies that they are hiring people with light autism into doing IT testing. It's a fantastic concept, and you find it several places in Europe now, luckily. It's been very successful. So they managed to bring people from outside the workforce to become consultants in IT, which is a great step for a person. So you can, as we started out with, you can count how many people work in Unicus and say, this is one more life kind of into the workforce, lots of values, and you could end it there, which some people do, or some companies do. But we've challenged them also to go deeper, because you need to see the people that are employed. Do they actually like the work? Is it good for them in the longer term? Do they develop? Do they stay in the company? How does it influence their life quality? And now in the last report that they made, it's kind of, I would say, the first really more professional report this year. It goes to the quality of life that they're asking their employees, and they're working, as was mentioned from Ben, they're working with the people in the company to decide what to ask for and how they develop in the workplace. So how is the income coming and developing? How is their mental well-being? All these different areas, not too many, but the right areas to judge whether they are actually having a better life staying with Unicus than, for instance, moving on to another company.
That's excellent, Katinka. Thank you very much. It's a great case and really shows how fair the social entrepreneurs is a role model in so many ways. But in practice, there are not that many investors that really follow this example of FAIRs already working to incorporate stakeholder voice in decision making. So Paige, I would like you to reflect a little bit on what obstacles are getting in the way and how have you seen others finding solutions?
Sure, thanks Arnaud. You're absolutely right. This is still a minority practice, but it is quickly gaining recognition actually as a key element of a robust IMM system to actually engage stakeholders. Actually, in our benchmark that we just launched yesterday, we have seen in the last year that around 28% of our clients, impact investors, now incorporate in stakeholder voice kind of into their decision making as part of their IMM practice, and that's a 17 percentage point increase over what we saw last year. So rapid growth, a lot of attention on this issue, which is a great thing, but in the spirit of a burning debate, I actually have mixed feelings about this kind of rapid growth, because while stakeholder engagement is extremely important and this kind of ultimate accountability to final beneficiaries is critical, it's really easy to do this in a way that's not thoughtful, that ends up being tokenistic or extractive. So I would caution investors not to rush into this work if they're not prepared to truly listen and change course when you learn things that surprise you. You know, with that said, I would say there's a lot of work that many can do to start on this journey. So, you know, we've seen many investors who've worked really hard to do this work well and have had great impact. But there are kind of the two main challenges that I see, and I think this echoes some of what Katinka shared, is that, first of all, it can be just really difficult to define a discrete set of stakeholders or final beneficiaries, particularly depending on the type of impact that you're trying to achieve as an investor. So say you're working on climate, that looks really different than if you're working on community health and you're a place-based investor. And also the type of investor you are. So some are working with more complex financial products or more steps removed. But that doesn't mean that it's impossible to define beneficiaries, and indeed it's important to do so. I think as a first step, being very clear about who your ultimate intended beneficiaries are, and maybe a more proximate chain of the stakeholders that you can reach more easily will allow you to think about how you can continue to work towards greater accountability over time. And then the other challenge that we see really clearly here is that even if you can clearly identify who the stakeholders or ultimate beneficiaries are, it's hard to reach them, and it's hard to reach them in a way that's meaningful, not extractive, and also affordable. I think cost is actually a prohibitive factor, unfortunately, in this space so far. So surveys are by far the most common way that we see clients doing this kind of work. Peter mentioned lean data as a tool, and it can be really helpful, but it's also can be expensive and time consuming to do at scale. We've also seen clients, one that's notable is Finance in Motion, who I know are an EVPA member as well. And they commission third-party impact studies to review and understand the effect that their financing is having on their target stakeholders. So looking at things like changes in employment, income, livelihoods for the target groups that they're actually working to serve. And what's really important about the way they do that is that they actually make use of what they're learning from those studies, feeding it back into comparing their impact performance data and informing their strategy and shifting course where they need to. So I think final points on this one is just, there's an opportunity for all investors to think about incorporating this question into your diligence and monitoring processes. You have the power to choose who you're investing in, and working with companies and fund managers who agree that stakeholder engagement is important. And finally, transparency is just like the critical starting point. It's always the critical starting point for accountability. So if you can identify who your stakeholders are and think about them, not just your investors as the audience for your impact reporting, as Ben said, I think that's really the key here.
Thank you so much, Paige. I think this really completes the whole spectrum of interventions on this first topic. So now it's going to be the moment to open this topic to the audience. So I would like to, whoever has already questions or reflections, please already type them down in the questions panel here in GoToWebinar. So then we will make sure that to translate them and debate them here in the panel. Meanwhile, I would like to ask all the audience, based on what we just heard from the different practitioners. Sorry, let's see. I have a technical problem here. But yeah, then you can go to Slido very quickly.
In the meanwhile, maybe I can just jump in to already tell them about the question so that they can start thinking about it. So we want to ask you a quick open question, which is about what are the key elements that drive stakeholder accountability in practice. So we discussed a lot about stakeholder accountability, and now we have also the possibility to join the Slido. So through your phone, please log in through the QR code or also through your computer, and try in few words, obviously with 1 or 2 words, to tell us what do you think are the key elements that drive stakeholder accountability.
Thanks, Gianluca. Sorry for this.
Arnau, go ahead.
No, it's great. So we should already start seeing as soon as people start writing any concept. I see that we already have resource constraints, consultation, regulation, legislation, key elements that drive stakeholder accountability, again, reputation. Okay, I see now many are popping up, which is great. So we get getting objective feedback, responses, not just to please. That's a good one. Continued investment, intentionality, evidence, humility, being serious about impact. Don't know if I'm missing any of them. Credibility I see here around. So that's definitely many important drivers, definitely, of stakeholder accountability. I see participation as well, willingness to change, realizing when wrong. It's definitely an important one. So thank you everyone for your collaboration. I don't know if there are any questions. I think there is already one. So maybe it's, as the last people include some of the last words. I see the SDGs here already: report building, cost, governance. So we have already one question, which is open to all the speakers. So now we are going to move already to the Q&A. Of course, if you still want to write any of these words, then we will keep them. But moving to the Q&A, we have a question for all the speakers, which is how to ensure impact validation. So I don't know if there is any volunteer among the speakers that would like to talk about the topic of validation.
Sure. Seems appropriate for us to.
Great.
So yeah, I mean, I think from Bloomberg's perspective, impact validate, we think about kind of 2 key pillars to impact accountability, one being around impact management, measurement practices, and one around the performance. And so starting with practice, which, you know, this webinar is all about, is we think an opportunity to start by having a third party actually look at the extent to which your practices are aligned with emerging best practice, continuing to raise the bar in line with peers around what the entire investment life cycle looks like, and the way that you're thinking about impact throughout your processes is one thing that I think it's worth having some, you know, expert opinions on as part of impact validation, because I think practice can translate then into ultimate impact achieved. But of course, you know, just practices and processes aren't very satisfying, and actually looking at the validating underlying performance is important. One way that you know, there's a lot of different ways you can do that. There are experts out there who do much more validation and assurance on underlying portfolio data information, you know, especially when it comes to checking things like calculations on greenhouse gas emissions, for example. And so it's a new and growing field. I think it's really important, but we see that, you know, if you start with thinking about, your practices and also your performance reporting, and having a third party kind of check, are those reports complete? Are they reliable? Doing a representative sampling of some of the underlying data, that's a really good place to start.
Thank you so much. Go ahead, Katinka.
I'll just add that we have experienced as well that having a third party in there to challenge the company and to help them out is, to us, very often very useful, because this takes time. And when you're an entrepreneur or startup early phase company, it's a lot to think about. So kind of to keep your thoughts together and to be really specific on working with the impact measurement and management team, our experience is that, yeah, it's quite good to have someone who knows a bit more than you do, maybe, on how to do this and give you some guidance and help, even though the company themselves has to own this.
That's great, Katinka. Thank you so much. I guess, Ben, you might be pleased to hear these answers already. I don't know if you would like to add anything, or Peter as well. Sure.
Not a lot, other than I'm really pleased that validation, verification, assurance is being talked about. It's rising up the agenda, as this page said. You know, SVI have been pushing this for 10 plus years, but only now I think is it getting traction in the market. And I think we're exploring the different types of assurance that exist. You know, Paige touched on that as well. Like, there's assurance of practice, like what systems and processes do we see, and you can get a stamp or a certificate to say, yep, the systems and processes are good. Or you can look at a report with some numbers and verify whether those numbers feel fair or reasonable. So we're in an interesting time when I think different types of assurance are being introduced to the market. And I'm just really pleased that we're all engaging with it, because it is really important to add credibility to the impacts that we're talking about, and not just add credibility, but the other thing about assurance that we don't often talk about is that it's a useful learning exercise. People see it as a rubber stamp or a kind of a thing that tells you if you're right or wrong. But a lot of people that have done the SVI assurance have said, well, I learned a lot from that, and I'm really grateful for that opportunity. So those are just my reflections.
Great, Ben. Thank you so much for completing these reflections. Peter, maybe actually we will ask you this new question we received from the audience, which is asking what are good practices or impact frameworks to collaborative measurement and evaluation together with beneficiaries. I don't know if you have something to say here.
Well, I think there are many practices outside. What comes first to my mind, being a bilateral donor agency representative, is when you're doing a private sector development project, we are working usually with the donor committee for enterprise development, DCD. They have a really good standard in terms of everything that is result measurement, and including how to go deep down with the beneficiaries. It's a little bit connected to the question before. You can even have an audit of your system, whether the system is working, before you then have an external review of the whole project. There are tools out there for beneficiary assessment. For instance, STC has a tool that is called how to know the beneficiary assessment that I could probably share, and there you will find probably many more links to other documents.
Great, Peter. Thank you so much. We received a couple of other questions, but we should move on to other statements and other topics. So here is Alessia. Alessia, I leave you the floor then.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Arnau. And of course, thank you, Ben, Katinka, Paige, and Peter for inspiring us with your insights on the first statement. And of course, thank you to Gianluca to open the webinar and to frame a bit what burning topics are for us as a BPA and why they are so important. So I would like now to move to the second statement that you can see here on the slide, which is about transparency, that, as Paige already said, is another important topic related to impact measurement and management, together with assurance accountability. So the statement is transparency initiatives are often adding reporting burdens rather than generating learnings, as they are missing the impact management components. So this narrative that links burden and impact data collection, impact data reporting is still something that we hear in our community, in our space, and this coming from investees, but also investors that feel obliged sometimes to report on the impact, to be transparent. So maybe we can try to change the narrative, starting reflecting more and mentioning more the impact management component, as we have already done with our practitioners today and experts. But I would like to ask some other questions to continue the debate, focusing on transparency. So let's start again from Peter. So Peter, what are for you actually the elements that transparency initiatives should focus on?
Yeah, I think that transparency is putting pressure on you doing your impact measurement and management in particular, properly. You all know you can only manage what you measure. Well, it's perhaps a bit absolute, but if you're not measuring, it's quite difficult to manage. Again, you are obliged to do the financial accounting. This has a good reason. Lots of shareholders and stakeholders like the state and your employees need to know what's happening. And there are even better reasons to do impact measurement and management. And money should go where the best impact is. Katinka has it clearly said. So transparency would help with this, and with learning, of course, too. So we want to know how did you achieve this? How did you achieve your impact? Can we replicate this? Can we go to scale? These are all elements that are important. Impact is about going to scale, being replicable. Really, we want more impact. We need more impact, not only in climate change, but in achieving the SDGs, all the SDGs, okay? So all donors and many investors would dream of a transparent impact measurement management system, and so do private companies as well. Think about the carbon credits. We all would want the money to flow where the highest impact is, where the best projects are. Well, we are far away from this in climate change, just being one category of impact, but climate change is already very doing good because they have even the private sector paying for impact. With SDGs, we are lagging a little bit behind, but that's what we really need inside inside the impact management. We want to see how impact is achieved, how it can be attributed, and how it can be replicated, and ideally even sold to impact payers. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Peter. I think it's very much important also to highlight that this focus on processes, actually, so on how everything has been done and managed. I would like to continue on transparency initiatives, and I would like to ask Paige this time to tell us how can these initiatives ensure that reporting requirements are really meaningful for decision making? And as we said, decision making is crucial when it comes to management and transparency. So Paige.
Sure, thanks, Alessia. Yeah, so impact investors are facing a lot more scrutiny and a lot more reporting requirements than they used to. And I think on the whole, that's a good thing, right? It's a sign that the market's maturing. Voluntary and regulatory disclosure requirements coming in kind of have the potential to play a really important role in helping protect the credibility, which is a word that's come up a lot today, the credibility of the impact label. But I think there is a really big risk that we're headed to a suboptimal balance between the burden and the benefit of some of these kinds of reporting requirements. So we need to kind of collectively make sure that we don't let these requirements drive a race to the bottom. Investors are potentially at risk of shifting some of their resources and mindsets that currently go into learning and impact management towards box checking and compliance. And that would be a really bad outcome, I think, for all of us and the impact that we want to see. So the move towards greater impact disclosures, say from the taxonomy or SFDR, it's increasing momentum, I think, particularly around the search for standardized metrics. And as Peter said, it's important to be able to measure in order to manage. And there can be real value in drawing on standardized metrics when they're relevant to your work. We've seen that there's opportunity for more investors to do that than do currently. Or we did recent research on impact reporting, and we found that actually fewer than half of impact reports use standardized indicators or cite the sources or definitions of the metrics that they're using. So there's definitely room for improvement in terms of comparability, but we also shouldn't sacrifice everything on the altar of comparability with some of these new reporting requirements, which really focus on standardization. So context matters, as anyone who works in impact space knows. And we don't want to lose sight of that. If new requirements cause us to start force-fitting complex narratives about how impact actually occurs, in fits and starts and with all sorts of unforeseen ripple effects, if we try to force-fit that into standardized indicators without also including space for context, we're going to lose nuance. And that would not be a good thing for the sector either. So, my hope is that impact investors take this opportunity as there's increased scrutiny and reporting requirements to take a step back and think about how to design internal functions, like within your organization. How can you protect space for reflection, learning, improvement as part of your IMM system alongside your compliance and reporting requirements? There's a lot of talk these days about integrating, say, financial and non-financial reporting. I'd like to hear alongside that more of a conversation around the integration of compliance and genuine impact management and performance for learning purposes. So that's what I'd say.
Thank you so much, Paige. I think that you mentioned it. Box checking and filling boxes is really one of our greatest fears. So we really would like to prevent the sector going in this direction. And this is again linked to the management component. So I like now to ask Ben, knowing that you have worked with the UNDP SDG impact standards to help investors focus on management practices rather than reporting, can you tell us a little bit more about it, and also tell us about the main learnings from this impact management perspective to really improve these transparency initiatives?
Yeah, thanks, Alessia. So I'll start, describing about the SDG impact standards that the UNDP have brought out. And these standards really emerged from the fact that the UNDP were part of the impact management project structured network. So I'm pretty sure everyone's aware of the IMP, which brought all the standard setters together. And the UNDP created a new set of standards. Oh, wow, joy. That's just what we need, another set of standards. But the beauty of the standards is that they create a framework for all the other standards. So they've really created a set of standards for managing impact that draw upon the maze of standards that exist out there, including SVI's own standards. So I do think it brings them together nicely for organizations that want to contribute positively to sustainable development. And it's organized in 4 sections. So the first section's on strategy. Do you have a strategy for contributing positively to the SDGs? Second section's on a management approach. Have you got an impact management approach in place? The third bit is on transparency. And the 4th section is on governance. And they really fit together quite well. The governance is there to hold you accountable to the strategy. The management approach is there to help you achieve the strategy, and transparency is about reporting. But what's been brilliant about it is that it puts reporting and that transparency as just part of management. And one of the key lessons when we've been working with them in taking these standards to the market is that people are still very much focused on a report, and that impact measurement is about producing a report. But a report is just a subset of management practice as a whole. And that's one of the key things that we've learned. And the second thing that I want to say is about this idea that, reporting or transparency is a burden. And I think it has become a burden for a lot of people, and things only become a burden when they're not useful or not helpful, right? If it's useful and helpful, then people don't see it as a burden. I think the problem is that a lot of the reporting is done for an investor or someone else, or shaped by someone else asking the organization for report on this, use this metric. And I sort of pushed back a little bit on pages to talk about, or maybe misinterpreted what you're saying about standardized metrics, but I think standardized metrics have got a lot to answer for, because if everybody is asked to use standardized metrics, they often don't mean much in that context. I think you're also saying that context is king. So there's a balance to play here between, I think that's what you're saying, standardized metrics, are they helpful? I feel that for decision making, they're not. They're not often helpful for within an organization using data to make better decisions and improve. And so that's when things become like a burden for organizations. And so my last point, I suppose, is that what we've learned to really embed impact management practices is to focus on what businesses are already doing to make decisions. Every business makes decisions at the moment. Everyone wants to improve how they're performing and continuously improve. You know, everyone I've met who works in any organization, they get to work and they try and make decisions to improve. The key then is to say, well, you have this decision making in place. How can you build more impact data into that decision making? And if you can illustrate the power of collecting data around well-being and impact and things like that, and build that into your decision making, it's only going to excite people and say, oh, look, I can make better decisions, and I can improve impact, and I can improve valuation for value more broadly. So it's about recognizing that reporting, yes, that's part of the picture, but let's start with how you're currently making decisions. What data do you need to improve that? And then go from there.
Thank you so much, Ben. And again, I think it's important starting looking and reflecting on reporting, putting this in the perspective of something bigger, which is really everything that is linked to the management component. And also maybe to refer to your comment on standardized indicators, referring to what Paige was saying, as a BPA, one of the burning topics, as you have heard from Arnaud, will be actually on that, standardized versus customized indicators, because as we've seen also today among our panelists, there are controversial opinions, but everything is really then up to discussion. So we will stay tuned, we will say more about it. And then maybe to close this round of debate, I would like to go back to Katinka. We talked about the fact that increased transparency, thanks to this increased transparency, it's much easier to assess the impact of investees. And you touched upon a bit on that at the beginning, but we would like to hear from you why you think that during the screening and due diligence phases, when actually the investor is going to select potential investees, why it's important not just focusing on the current impact, but as you already mentioned, also looking at the potential impact.
It's a really interesting discussion. So I think one thing is that when we as an investor try to find a investee that actually fits to us as an investor, you need to look at what do you as an investor see as the potential impact, and of course then be really clear with the social entrepreneur about what ambitions they have towards what they see as their potential impact, and are you really aligned in those judgments, and as an investor, are we the right one to lift the company towards that, to achieving that potential, because that's not always. And I learned that the hard way, investing in companies, that when you after 2 years you find that we're maybe not the right persons or the competences to actually work with this company. So that's one thing, and I think it's important then to see what can these guys become. But the other aspect is actually when you are not looking at the more narrow line of real impact investors. I mean, the big money out there are on quite normal investors, And they are now exposed to the ESG. They are exposed to our competence of measuring impact, and they are starting with the transparency wave, you could say. They have to deal with these things as well. And I think there, at least, it's really, really interesting to see those discussions as a more normal investor, which our company, the company that owns Third Social Entrepreneur, Third, and they are a normal investor with a diverse portfolio. And those discussions going on here on how far in the line of impact do you actually manage to move as a company? How impactful are you? I mean, then you have the measurements, but when you look at your different, for instance, existing investments, do you run from the ones that are not green enough? Or do you actually take on that workload, which is to get that company into becoming green, to stay with them and actually move them? And maybe that is the best way and the quickest way of changing the world, is to actually start with a gray company, make them green, or do everybody leave the gray ones and hope that there are green ones that they can support and buy into? I find that discussion quite interesting as well in these perspectives.
Thank you, Katinka, for adding your view on that. I think that in order to manage the time, I will continue asking a question we received from the audience, which is actually about transparency, and then I would like to ask our panelists to again unmute themselves and comment, starting from who would like to start, and then we can have a second poll which is also linked to transparency. So the question is, how far should impact data be shared by companies? Does commercial sensitivity mean that they will never share data for more public scrutiny? So here there's commercial sensitivity and transparency. Is there anyone that would like to start giving his insights or her insights on that? Ben.
Thanks, Felicia. Yeah, I think it's a good point. You know, there is going to be some times when some of the impact data is commercially sensitive, and maybe one of the ways around that is to focus on assurance of practices rather than assurance of the data itself. So an organization could seek assurance that they are collecting the right data, using the data in the right way without having to publish it. So that's just one possibility that popped into my head.
Great. Then anyone would like, Katinka, go ahead.
Yeah, and actually, when you're working with the social impact space, you very often find that that's also one reason for why it's difficult to collect some data, is that it's quite scary, the notion that you would actually maybe make the data transparent, right? So you need really to take care of people's personal life out there. So that is a challenge in this area, and very often that means you do not share the things that you maybe actually care about as a social entrepreneur, and very often you also need to bring out stories. So you end up doing a mix on more boring measurements that you can share, and then maybe you add in some stories with people that are actually experiencing the results and can give some flavor, but where you end up actually with measurements and numbers maybe that not always are the ones you would have liked to have, but they can actually be too vulnerable.
I think if you are a real social entrepreneur, then you would want to others replicating you and your business. That's part of having more impact. So at least for these entrepreneurs with this kind of mindset, there would be not this this conflict of interest. But of course, in the normal impact enterprise, it could be. Then you have to decide how you can aggregate numbers, insights, so it's still interesting, but cannot be replicated. And of course, with your investors and donors, you have to be careful that this is then not out in the public. which is for us a problem. Everything could be made public. So the kind of data you don't want to get out in the public, you should never share with us.
Thank you, Peter. I don't know, Paige, if you want to share something else, but I think also this last point, again, on replication, on scaling, you started with that, Peter. It's an element that we should start putting into the picture. So really using impact data also to facilitate scaling a replication, which is something that is crucial in our space. So I think that for the time being, I can stop maybe with questions, and then I can transfer the floor to Gianluca for the third one. But let me ask you a question first. So you should be already connected to Slido. Here, as you can see, there is a question for you all, so I'll give you the time to connect and to look at your phones while reading the question. So how do you think transparency initiatives, for example, the EU Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, the SFDR in jargon, or for example, the EU Social Taxonomy you might be aware of, could include some elements that go beyond impact measurement? So again, shouldn't be just about reporting, but also taking into account the management component, the fact that it's important to use this data to take them better informed decision and to see what is working, what is not. So let me read the answers while you vote. So I'm seeing people starting voting, which is always good. So the first answer is asking for third-party assurance of impact management practices. So we talked already about third-party assurance, and now we're talking about it looking at management practices. And again, we also touched a bit upon the importance of looking at the processes. Then asking for identification of impact objectives ex ante and then monitoring. Then requiring a theory of change per each investment product. The fourth one is asking to comply with the operating principles for impact management. My colleagues can then add a link to the chat for those of you that don't know these operating principles. And we also include the possibility to set other, and then you can use the chat to let us know what other things we were not thinking about when we put together the slide or come to your mind. And also none of the above. This is a multiple choice question. I see 12 people answering. It would be great to have more maybe. So for the time being, there is enough votes for asking for identification of impact objectives ex ante, but also again, this third-party assurance might be one of the options to really bring those transparency initiatives, bring them beyond the measurement component. So I think let's reach 20. So people take your phone and vote. We still miss 3 answers. I think, no, it's not coming. So I would like to say that, yeah, okay, we have a winner apparently. So it's really the setting objectives ex ante, which is, of course, also the first step of the EVPA 5-step approach to impact measurement and management. So it sounds familiar, I would say, and also relevant and interesting. So we will then share the recording as said, so we will have access also to these polls. I think I can then stop and we can directly go to the third statement. So Gianlu, the floor is yours.
Ale, for this very interesting discussion on transparency, and I'm here now to read the third statement and the last discussion, which I think is one of the most interesting, not to remove anything from what has just been discussed, but we're all very excited about this sentence, which states that assessing the investor contribution includes whether the investor is going where others would not go, adopting a high risk long-term approach. Without it, impact is about cherry picking and not about solving complex societal issues. And although this statement can sound a bit controversial, I I think it's important to stress the fact that this is fundamental for us, because it stresses the importance of assessing which are the different contributions that an investor can have on its investees. And it poses an accent on taking high risks and being long-term oriented, which are two very important characteristics if investors want to be serious about solving these issues that we are facing, and that often brings them where other investors are not, either cannot or are not willing to go. So let's now hear from the speakers, and I'd like to start from Paige. I already saw her, and I'm just asking her like a gut reaction. What is your reaction to this statement?
You know, I just couldn't resist. I want to dive right in on this one. I actually don't think I agree with this one. Or at least I think there's some nuance. To me, not every impact investor needs to take a high risk long-term approach in order to have impact, especially if we want to see more capital coming into the space that we kind of call impact investing. That said, I agree that cherry picking is a real risk. And to avoid that, I think all investors need to be clear about how their particular investment strategy and impact strategy are related. So what's your risk appetite, your time horizon, and so on. And then based on that, where are you best, as an investor, where are you best positioned to make the greatest contribution to the specific issue or issues that you're seeking to address? So, you know, where we've seen investors that are really good at assessing and making investor contribution, it's investors who are A, expert in their understanding of the issues, the challenges that they're trying to solve, and be self-aware, right? So that they understand where they sit in the system and in the ecosystem of the challenge that they're trying to address, and also where their resources sit relative to other resources that are in the field. And of course, you know, good strategy is as much about being clear on what you're not well positioned to do as it is about what you are well positioned to do. So one of our clients, MedAccess, I think is a really good example of this. You know, they've been very thoughtful about investor contribution, and what they do is they use innovative guarantee financing structures to get medical products to be more affordable and more accessible in low and middle income countries. And they've developed for themselves this bespoke counterfactual framework, and they use that to estimate what would occur in the absence of their intervention, and they underpin that with really deep sectoral research. And then they can estimate a predicted impact differential for relevant health impact outcomes with and without their intervention. And that's just one example of the reason that they're able to really assess their impact, their investor contribution, is because they're saying they're self-aware, they know what specific role they play, and they know what specific need there is on the issue that they're trying to address. And so the bottom line here for me is no one actor can single-handedly solve any complex societal problem. Different types of capital are needed for all different types of challenges at different points in time, right? Also, the nature of the challenges that we're addressing will evolve over time. So an impact investor with a high risk threshold might try to start early with a demonstration effect and provide catalytic funding. And then later on, as that concept is proven and scaled, maybe new types of funding come in, and sustaining and scaling impact. Yes, maybe more traditional investors will come in, but not always. And so I think it's important that we realize that sustaining, scaling impact is no less meaningful, in my opinion, than catalyzing it.
Thanks, Paige, for already touching upon some very interesting elements here. I'd like now to invite Katinka to jump in this conversation and tell us a bit more about the risk proneness of fair social enterprises, and most importantly, how it evolved throughout your experience.
Thank you. And I really like Paige's view on this, because what we've experienced in FIRD is that when you start out as a kind of really idealistic social investor, you start with also what EVPA learned us, that you need to go long term, you need to go complex issues, you need be in there, and it's kind of tough, and it's also kind of expensive, because a lot of the things that you're trying to work with are complex issues involving a lot of other institutions, and not the least, you need to work at some levels with governments if you really want to tackle complex social issues. At least if you're working in the more developed part of the world, there will be governments, there will be laws, there will be structures. So as an investor, it's kind of difficult. It's a difficult landscape, and we need as investors to be to know that area, to see the map, and we need to be willing to involve. So, and what we found is that if we want to invest the larger money, and if we want to convince more money to invest in social issues, you need actually to have a portfolio of different kind of solutions. If you put all the eggs in the complex problems kind of investments or social entrepreneurs working in that area, you are not likely to get a lot of financial returns, to be honest. It takes time, right? And we're maybe not that focused on actually getting some money back. So to us, it's been natural to evolve. We know the area more than when we started. So now we see that we invest in also the lighter touch, the maybe less impact, but maybe not. It's easier impact, but it's scalable. So you could put the larger money in actually making that kind of impact, but then you still need to hang on to some of the complex, really high risk investments, because you learn a lot. You hopefully you help out a lot, but you need to have that as well. So, and every investor, I guess, will have a different kind of portfolio in how much high risk, high impact you are able to do, actually. So it's been a ride for us, and I think the normal investment development is that you start with high risk, also because you do not know what you're doing, and when you've had some learnings along the route, you tend to go lower risk, because it's not nice, right? It's not a good feeling to really miss out for some of your investments. So you tend to lessen the risk. And that's where you need to discuss with your colleagues. Hi guys, are we actually now doing too low risk here? Should we go back where we started? How much of this can we handle? How much can we be into those really high risk, really hour you need to put in if you're working complex issues with high social impact, potential high social impact?
Thanks, Katinka. I think you really touch upon. I think what's very interesting is that we consider you as a pioneers in the ecosystem, and seeing how this reasoning evolved. It's very interesting, not just for us as a community, but also for the audience and the practitioners that are connected in the webinar. Now let's touch upon the long-term piece, and I'd like to ask Ben, what does this long-term mean to you, and why do you think it's particularly important to solve complex societal issues?
Thanks, Gianluca. This is a fascinating statement, and I'm not an expert on any of these things really, but I think it's good that we're talking about sort of long-term versus short-term, and risk, and balancing risk, impact risk particularly. I do feel like we tend to have an obsession with short-termism. Look, the financial markets are all very much stacked around short-term returns. And so just how does that translate into impact? I'm not sure. I'm not very versed in how impact investors think about this. So it's fascinating to hear these views. I do think that complex issues, by their very nature, cannot be fixed quickly. So these are sort of ones that require long-term capital. It has higher risk attached to it, but then again, the returns are higher as well. So high risk, high returns. I suppose when I was trying to think about how to answer the question, I think as well as thinking about like long-termism, I think it's also more about joined up thinking and collaboration to solve complex issues. So complex issues, yeah, they will take a long time, but they can be solved not just through time, but through better connectivity, collaboration, joined up thinking, and I suppose that does take more time. You know, we'll just talk a little bit about principle number 5 of the SVI principles, which is do not overclaim, which talks about your contribution to change. And we encourage people to ask 2 questions. The first question, would the impact have happened without our investment? And if the answer is yes, then that should be reflected in the sort of amount of impact you have, and you could probably decide to take your resources elsewhere, a bit like what Katinka was saying earlier about a grey company. You know, is it worth sticking with that and having more impact? Yes, it probably should, and that should be reflected in the measurement, therefore. And the second question is asking, well, who else contributes to the impact? And hearing the answer to that question takes you into more of a systems thinking approach, like, oh, we're contributing to that impact, but so is this organization, and so is this, and that information should be useful to lead for collaboration. And so that's why I think those 2 questions, would the impact have happened without our investment, and who else contributes to the impact, are really important to good impact management and to solving these complex societal issues that we have.
Thank you very much, Ben. I think you touched upon other very important topic and concepts such as system change, having systemic view. We won't open those conversations now, but I think this is a very important discussion and very much linked to different roles and the different nuances of actors that are involved into philanthropy, venture philanthropy, and impact investment. Let me now, let's say, conclude with the last question to Peter, actually. And I would like you to take a bit the development financial institutions angle and try to make us understand, like, to what extent DFIs can be risk-taking and adopt long-term vision, and also what does this approach entail for their impact measurement and management practices?
Okay, let me start with connecting a little bit what my colleague said before, defending for once a little bit the impact investors. If you're an impact investor, you need to preserve your capital or you'll go out of business. So in the long term, you need to have your financials okay. So you need to earn money on your investment to pay to cover your costs and conserve at least most of your capital. Otherwise, you will be out of the market and nobody's served by this as well. So that makes a case from my point of view. If you go into high risk areas where you sometimes may consider working together with others, like Katinka said, the public sector, philanthropy, doing blended finance, this kind of thing, which would lead us then to the development finance institutions, which are more or less public, right? It's a state who's a stakeholder, shareholder, the main shareholder or the only shareholder. So I don't know all the DFIs, but I think what is a problem here for many DFIs is what do the shareholders expect from them? What is in the statutes, or what are the objectives? If I just give you the example of the Swiss DFI, the government has some objectives for them, and one is capital preservation and 3% return. Okay, and cover your costs, of course. So that is almost excluding investing in high-risk countries. So they almost cannot invest there. There's another objective that they should, at least a certain percentage, but it's clearly a conflict of interest. So there's a problem. Nevertheless, I think, and that's what some are doing, and they can make a difference. They can, for instance, go into these structured funds, you all know, usually going into the mezzanine tranche, a second loss piece, something like this, and you have a first loss piece with philanthropy or donors. They can provide some implicit political risk guarantee, investing alongside private investors in certain contexts. They can, of course, use the usual instruments with equity, quasi-equity, things that are more long-term, and that may compensate higher risk in the long run in a portfolio approach, of course. That's something you should not forget. They usually have as well technical assistance facilities, and could use them wisely for de-risking, for paying for impact even, and of course for helping the investees setting up impact measurement management systems. And that's, I think, where they could make really a big change. I personally have the impression that this decision should be based a lot more on impact objectives. But as we all know, the impact management and measurement is usually at the level of the investee. Some of them, like the Swiss DFI, is acting as a fund of fund. So the investee and the impact measurement is 2 steps away. That makes it complicated in terms of aggregation. Again, what can they do? I personally think what they should help us get the requirements higher. How can you create a market for impact measurement management? Via regulation, of course, via insights and commercial advantages of the companies using it, or by the investors. And the DFIs, I think they could be more demanding and pushing harder for real impact measurement management systems of the investees, and even paying for it with technical assistance out of these different pockets. Let me stop here.
Thank you very much, Peter, for also adding your point of view. And I think in general, what really emerged, and the key aspect I'd like to stress here after your contribution, is really the importance of recognizing a bit the different roles played by the different investors, and using the measurement of investor contribution to really be aware, and as Paige was stressing, being aware of the role that you're playing. And measuring investor contribution is definitely important in that respect. Let me now ask you for a final round of intervention, quick and concise, before we leave the floor to Alessia for the conclusions. And I'd like to ask you for a final recommendations that you would like to share with our audience that are hopefully connected and here interested to know how they can improve with their impact measurement and management practices. Let's actually follow the inverse order, since we opened up starting from Ben and then moving to Katinka, Paige, and Peter. I'd like to start now again with Peter, and then Paige, Katinka, and finally Ben.
Okay, my recommendation is do as much as possible impact measurement management, use technologies like lean data. And what I personally like most is thinking in terms of cost-benefit analysis. So trying to monetize impact as good as it gets, the qualitative aspect can be mentioned as well. And then based on this, your decisions, or let part of your decisions be based on this. It's always a complex thing with scorecards and many other things, but cost benefit, that's something we have learned is very powerful. It makes a lot of assumptions, implicit assumptions, explicit. It shows you clearly where the risks are in your assumptions. You have to think in terms of attribution, theory of change. That is really a really powerful tool, which I would recommend to use as an investor, as a company trying to monetize impact. But I'm a little bit advancing. That's on your list of burning topics, monetizing impact. So I would go for cost-benefit analysis.
Thank you, Peter. And you touched upon monetization as well, which I think is interesting. Let's now hear from Paige first, and then Katinka.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I think for me, the bottom line is to start by being very clear about who you are, what challenge you're trying to, what you're trying to achieve, and having those really basic building blocks, and then being willing to continue to, as you monitor that, open yourself up to the possibility of having others, including your stakeholders, potentially assurance providers, provide a double check to you and continue to learn. Treat it as something that you have to do on a regular iterative basis.
Thanks, Paige. Katinka, wanna go next?
Yeah, and I would say if you're an investor, think about your own theory of change. So what do you as an investor actually mean to represent out there? You need to be interested in measuring this impact. But I like what Ben said earlier, because I don't think the impact measurement and management will work unless it's useful. So he said, is it useful? Try to find things that are useful to the investees and to the beneficiaries. And then we have to work on the market, because a lot of this will only be staying kind of almost in Excel sheets, if not the people that are actually out there wanting our services, or the services of the social entrepreneurs, for instance, or the organizations doing good. The ones that needs to work with these organizations, they also need to ask for these measurements, right? So kind of the customers of the organizations and entrepreneurs doing good need to ask for measurements. They need to ask for this being documented. And today, it's not always that. So stay in there. We're gonna manage.
Thanks, Katinka, also for this positive notes. And then Ben, I'd like to conclude with you.
Thanks, Gianluca. Thank you, everyone. It's been a really great conversation. So what I normally say to enterprises, as opposed to investors, if there's a differentiation, enterprises, yeah, just start by thinking about how you make decisions, how you're looking to improve your impact and your performance, and bring in some impact questions into your existing processes for continuous improvement. Collect some data about the impact you're having on people, slowly build it up so that you can see the power of it in your decision making. Build those systems and processes up slowly over time, and hopefully see the benefits of them in your decision making. For an investor, and it's more of a kind of provocation, really. Do we need to standardize metrics? How comparable do results need to be? I feel like that sometimes can be problematic. And maybe as investors, can we look at the due diligence being focused on systems and processes? Are the people we're investing in collecting data and using it in a right way, rather than can we take their data and compare it with another investment? I feel like that's something that we've started to explore a lot today, and just more broadly, and that focus on systems and processes is an exciting development.
Great. So what an end of the webinar. So thank you so much, Ben, Peter, Katinka, and Paige, for sharing your last recommendations. As a BPA, since I still have 2 minutes, maybe I'll tell you what we have put here as key takeaways, considering the 3 main topics that we have touched. So accountability, transparency, and then also this focus on long-term risk, and why it's so important also to include IMM perspectives in everything. So the first takeaway is ensuring accountability to a wide range of stakeholders may be perceived as costly and difficult by investors, as we started saying at the beginning, but of course we cannot fail in being held accountable to intended beneficiaries effectively and at scale. And I think again we in the first part we really highlighted this important component of the story. And then going to transparency and everything related also to management and reporting, measuring a wide range of impact metrics to prove compliance is an exercise with little strategic value, and we have seen it today. Organizations should then focus on metrics that can drive their decision-making processes, everything that is about management rather than just measurement. And finally, to conclude, again, talking about catalytic role, I think that it's important to highlight that positive change takes time, and we've seen it, and requires also risk capital. Then, of course, it's good to diversify portfolio, but essentially time and risk are two important elements to take into account while you want to invest for impact. Thus, we should really measure. Again, this is very much linked to measurement, but also acknowledge the contribution of those players that support underserved segments, and this is something also Ben highlighted. So would have this happened without me, without my contribution? So really going where underserved segments are, and also those actors that play a catalytic role. So I think that for today we have transferred lots of messages. Again, as said, we will have lots of burning topics coming out from September on. You can use the QR code, but also you will receive the slides, the recording, and there will be also a short survey popping up after this webinar, because it's important also for us as EVPA to measure and manage then our impact. Thank you to our sponsors, European Commission and Financial Charity, but thank you once more, my colleagues Gianluca and Arnau, and Ben, Paige, Katinka, and Peter. Thank you so much for supporting us today in this raising the bar journey, I would say. So thank you for everyone that is still connected. Have a great afternoon and stay tuned. More burning topics will come.